Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media group in North America.
Lots of things are happening here in Canada with the latest economic update that was launched by the Prime Minister. And of course, today, with the Bank of Canada maintaining its policy rate at 2.25%, essentially with a deposit rate at 2.2%. Essentially, this is a decision that's kept for their overnight rate because of the economy, the way things are going. They're afraid of, we don't know what's going to happen with the CUSMA talks that's around the corner on July 1st. We have this uncertainty with this war between United States, Israel, and Iran, which has affected the global oil prices, and we don't know when that's going to end. So there's many things at play here. And to that, this is the response from the Bank of Canada. But what I want to do today is I want to go over all the stories that are top stories, which is Mark Carney, who essentially unveiled his spring economic update yesterday. I'm going to tell you what that means for Canadians. The latest on this U.S.-Israel war, where does it stand? And of course, some of the news that's taking place in, the U.S. and around the world. So let's dig deeper because this is, we've had one announcement back to back yesterday, the Liberal government, and today the Bank of Canada. So what does this mean? Okay, so let's start with Mark Carney. Essentially, his government unveiled their spring economic update. They revealed that Ottawa is going to double down on high spending and deficits. And essentially, they're saying that they want to do that by focusing on skilled trades and infrastructure. So this was Mark Carney's first spring update since taking office. This is a big moment for this banker turned politician. And so, it's at a time, like you said, Canada's dealing with unemployment numbers very high when it comes to housing shortage, labor gaps, and of course, the global uncertainty, with the US tariffs, energy markets. There's essentially also a housing crisis, an affordability crisis. So all of that is what Canadians are dealing with. So on some really high facts, key facts and stats of what was unveiled yesterday, which we can then talk about how it affects, the rate that Bank of Canada has announced. So essentially right now we're looking at the deficit for the year 2025 to 2026 projected at $66.9 billion. So let's round it up to $67 billion, which is $11.5 billion lower than what was, projected at $78.3 billion. And that was based on November 2025's budget. Now, since there has been an improvement with the deficit, which is $11.5 billion lower than expected, and essentially that was driven by stronger than expected economic growth. And when it comes to higher personal and corporate tax revenues and increased oil revenues, essentially this revenue windfall, the updated projected amount of the economic development, saying that it's about creating $60 billion in fiscal room, which would be the windfall over the 6-year planning period. But what this means is this government has announced that it's going to spend more. So not save on the deficit that it's been able to save by bringing it down, but reinvesting it back into the economy. Now, there's critics on both sides of what this means for what this government's doing, which is very different than what Canadians are used to when it comes to getting deficits under control and having measured spending and then targeting growth. This government is saying that, okay, yes, we were able to bring down the deficit, but we're going to take that money and we're going to spend more. So I'll go into what the new spending is. And of course, we can look at what it means for Canada in the long term. So the government has announced $54.5 billion in new spending, and the cost over the fiscal planning period about 5 to 6 years. But when it comes to the net new spending amount is $37.5 billion over the 6 years. Essentially, the key areas of the spending is going towards what this government's calling Team Canada Strong. It's a strategy to train 100,000 workers in skilled trades by 2030. They're going to be spending $6 billion in that for over the next 5 years. And when it comes to affordability measures, which we know is a massive thing that this government also campaigned on, but we've we've had held elections on affordability for, for the last, I guess, 10 years. And they're saying that they announced that $11.8 billion is allocated for Canada groceries and essential benefits, which is going to impact 12 million Canadians. And they're saying that these revenue sources are, on the average price of what, Canada has the fourth largest oil reserves. And it does have one customer, being the United States, taking about 90% of Canadian oil, and Canada sells below market rate to this one customer, the United States. So this revenue source is the $73 per barrel for oil. That's the WTI crude oil, and that is up from the amounts that were sold on the forecast of 2025, which was about $65 per barrel. So now debt to GDP, essentially this federal debt to GDP ratio for 2025 to 2026 is estimated at 4.1%, which is lower than the 4.2.4% predicted in November. So what does this mean? Yes, the deficit has improved, but almost all gains are being spent. So what was unveiled yesterday was, not a deficit reduction plan, but, what is going to be a reinvestment strategy. I'm going to go into detail with you. And of course, joining us in studio is the group editor, Ymedia. He's going to be joining us. Let us know the studio. There he is. Hello, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing quite well.
Thank you so much. A warm welcome on Ymedia. And we have been doing a series at Ymedia, Why Cities. So today we will be doing our 5th episode for Why City. At Why City, we are discussing the future of GTA. GTA has multiple municipalities, multiple cities, and the future of Canada. Our cities do shape up our lives, and that's the reason. And this year, we're also having elections in October this year. So we will be electing mayors, we'll be electing regional councillors, school board trustees. So we thought, why don't we start this series? So today is the 5th episode. Just yesterday at Y City, we had the mayor of Vaughan, Stephen Del Duca, was here. Another candidate for Oshawa, he was here. Tito Dento was here. So we have been discussing at Y City. Josh Metlow from Toronto, he was here. He ran for mayor of Toronto as well. So from Mississauga to Toronto to Oshawa to Richmond Hill to Vaughan to every single municipality that we are trying to touch here, Brampton, Burlington. So we thought we will carry on this series of Y City. And Y City, as much as we're doing this series on Channel Y, but we're also doing a special features in midweek newspaper. Y City, we started a special supplement in midweek newspaper as well. This will be discussed on Radio Y as well, and also on all our digital platforms. The initiative of Ymedia Group, Y City, is I think we've got some great feedback from for all our platforms for this initiative at Y City. Today, I want to discuss this Y City with two very special guests. Once again, I'd like to welcome both the guests. Ramona ji, warm welcome once again. You've been very actively involved in politics. You've been following politics at municipal, provincial and federal level. What's happening in our cities, who better than you? So we thought at Ymedia, you've covered so many different topics. So welcome back once again. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. It's great to be here. And of course, with everything that's going on in the world and domestically, these are important conversations to have indeed.
Thank you. Thank you. We also have Harneet. He's been very actively involved in many of the campaigns. Harneet, a warm welcome. How are you?
Thank you so much, Ymedia, for having me on your show. It's always a pleasure to be on Y Channel and Ymedia. Thank you for talking about cities. I think it matters a lot to our day-to-day life. So I'm thankful to Ymedia Group for putting together this Y City series on such an important topic, especially the fact that Ontario is going for a big municipal election.
Yeah, that's right. And cities are quite important. Ramona ji, I'll start with you, and similar question for both of you to begin with and set the tone. I've almost asked many of the mayor and all the candidates the same question. You know what, in 2008 when Beijing, they had Olympics in China, So many questions were raised whether Beijing would be able to host the Olympics, yes or no. 2010, we had India, New Delhi hosting the Commonwealth Games, then Qatar hosting the Soccer World Cup. But here are these cities, whether it was Seoul Olympics, Beijing Olympics, the Commonwealth Games in India, and now they're aiming for 2036 Olympics as well. So we used to see, we're having, LA Olympics once again in 2028. I remember 1984. They had Olympics. But Canada, we had Olympics in 1976, that was in Montreal. But after that, I don't think so, other than the Winter Games. Summer Olympics, I'm talking here Summer Olympics, or the Commonwealth Games, we're part of the Commonwealth family as well. But I doubt many of our cities, it would be a challenge for us to host Olympics by ourselves or Commonwealth Games by ourselves. So what could be the reason? Have we really seen the infrastructure of our cities grow till that level? There are many other cities who are really building massive infrastructure. Romana ji, do you see, you've traveled a lot, you've lived in many cities including London, LA, Toronto, in India, so you've traveled a lot, lived in many parts of the world. Do you see our cities here in Canada are really living up to the expectation of building a world-class infrastructure?
I mean, there's always the cost analysis that needs to be done in terms of, when you build that level of infrastructure for, once in a lifetime sort of an event that takes place in a city, that is a big spend that is, on the burden of the city and the country. And then the question remains, will the stadium or the state-of-the-art facilities be used after these world events? I recall living in London, England, when there was the Olympics being held there. And I'm going back, I think, 2008, I believe, or
2012.
No, 2012, correct. Okay,
Yeah,
2012.
London Olympics was in 2012, yeah.
It was in China.
And before that was 1948, so you and I, none of us were born. So I remember by heart any Olympics, but it was 2012. Yeah, please go ahead.
Correct, 2012. And I recall I used to work in central London, and then, you read the newspaper on your way to work. And for the long time, it was announced, because the city was going to have a massive influx of people visiting for the games. And so perhaps, work from home. And I was in telecom. So, I've been able to work from home for like 2 decades, not since COVID, which have seen a shift from work from home. So, because, majority of the work is online, and as long as you had a computer and internet and phone, you were able to work. So, so it was, heavily announced. And so it's telling, Londoners to stay out of central London because of, high congestion, with the traffic that's coming into the city. And if you know London, you know that people live in the outer boroughs and travel to central London, through the subway system called the Tube, every day. So essentially, when the time came around to the Olympics, London was like a ghost town, because essentially all the workers stayed out of central London, and the projected revenues that were estimated for retailers and restaurants and essentially the economy that gets a boost from the attraction of the games, as well as the tourism that comes in, it did not meet its standards. And it was, very devastating for the city that it had projected so much. And perhaps some of the criticism, once reviewed afterwards, was did the city warn Londoners too much to stay out of the city, and therefore now you don't have like the normal traffic and the congestion that comes into central London, but also, it just didn't meet the expectations. And, I've traveled to like Germany and many different countries. And, when you look at those stadiums that were built for some of these massive games, and I apologize because I'm not that much into sports, so I can't really describe, some of these things, but I can tell you from an infrastructure standpoint, and through policy and data, is that, it's a big cost. It's a really big cost for a city. And then it's like what to do with these stadiums. A lot of them, if you were to even take a tour of some of the ones that are like in ruins because they're not used. And that was the other thing, right? That's why a lot of cities eventually didn't put up their hands to host some of these things, because of the upfront costs. And then obviously, what could be variables of, the revenues that could come into the city and the country. So So yeah, you'd have to look at it as like if you're going to invest in state-of-the-art stadiums and facilities and infrastructure, then it must be more of a plan for the actual city in the long-term basis, not for just like a one-off event, right? I mean, you could look at it as like when people say, "Oh, how much do you spend on a wedding?" Right? It's a one day. You're spending so much money to have, this massive celebration. Should you use that money for other things? It's obviously that's up for debate when it comes to obviously the Indian culture because of how massive the weddings are. But it's one of those, again, the same sort of logic goes into it. It's a one-off event. What is your investment front and what are you going to do after the investment has been made in terms of, is it viable? And in this case, it's tax dollars on the risk.
Yeah. When I'm talking about infrastructure, of course, I'm talking about so many other things, because whenever you're hosting games, there's transit involved. You build infrastructure for transit, for our stadiums, or so many other things. But even in general as well, I'm talking, Harneet, I'll come to you. Do you think, the kind of infrastructure that many countries are building, whether it's US has some great infrastructure in many cities. You go to Europe, you go to China, you go to India, Japan, Korea, they've built some brilliant infrastructures there. In India, I think when we're talking about transit, while I was in India, Delhi had a metro, and very few cities in India would have a metro. But now you go there, there's a lot of metros, there are underground trains, so many of the second tier or even third tier cities have started developing this. One was the first city we had, a subway extended to the 905 area I'm talking. And then I know it's going to be Markham and Richmond Hill also now connected. They're working on that. But imagine, the infrastructure, it takes years and years to build. 96 or 97 was the last time we built a highway, 407. We haven't built a highway in this quarter century. So infrastructure, I think, the right time to talk about why cities, infrastructure, elections. Harneet, your take.
Absolutely. I think hosting an event of that scale requires a lot of infrastructure, a lot of money. But I think one of the key things which I want to highlight, it requires a lot of political will, both from the federal and the provincial and the municipal levels, because their lives will be impacted. The federal government has to invest. You mentioned a few cities and a few countries, for example, Beijing in 2008, you mentioned India. You have to understand that a lot of those countries have one very important thing that you need to host a large scale event. That's population per square kilometer. You cannot host a massive event if you don't have the population to, one, support the tax dollars required to do that kind of event, and two, actually support the fan base. Like when India did the Commonwealth Games and when Beijing did the Chinese, the Olympics, you had tons of local fans who traveled and supported those events. If you were to do that event in a country of 40 million people, which primarily likes winter sports more than summer sports, the likelihood that you would have a large-scale fan base to support the cost of that development is not there. Compare us to the United States. You have 300 plus million people. They have immense following of different sports based on different population centers. And as you rightly said, they have the infrastructure that they can support that kind of events. But let's talk about the political will. 2008 was the time the world was coming out of the financial crisis. China had to prove to the world that they are the superpower they think they were. If you look at India, despite all the corruption scams and the allegations that came, it was a big political will of the local government of that time in 2010 that said, we will do this regardless of the cost. And they actually lost power after that, despite the fact that some of the biggest infrastructure things, as you talked about, the metro expansion, happened singularly because they had an event to build to. Let's talk about Qatar. The world talked about Qatar being a place where human rights violations were talked about. All of those things were talked about, and they were important things. But at the same time, a small country the size of that nation in the Middle East was able to host the FIFA World Cup, build stadiums that did not exist. And as I was told by some of your sports journalists, that they actually had to tear down those stadiums after that because they don't need it. But that tells you that political will was there. Right from the king to their government, they wanted to invest the money it takes to build Qatar in the center of the world. And they honestly did that. Some of the reasons why Qatar is considered a geopolitical powerhouse in this world, and they're also acting as a mediator between a lot of countries that are fighting, is because they were able to show their world power. So I think infrastructure requirements, as Ramona said, I think those are very important. The ROI in a country like us sometimes doesn't exist. But at the same time, what you are pointing out in terms of infrastructure, that is a root problem. it's a shame that we haven't built an infrastructure like the highways and stuff since the last 25 years. I think that's a bad problem. And I think it comes back to the point that you now have a federal government that is at least talking about building that infrastructure. But most importantly, you have to see that governments that reward infrastructure creations are generally rewarded by Canadians at the ballot boxes. I'll repeat that line. Governments that invest in massive infrastructure are generally rewarded very well in Canada. So if you look at the provincial government, you have had multiple majorities by the PCs. Even if they drop in the polls, the fact that they're the government which always talks about Highway 413, they talk about 407, making HOV lanes, they're trying to talk about those things, two-way GO trains. You see the ballot, the Canadian public is rewarding them. At the same time, when Mark Carney was running for election and he was talking about Build Canada Strong, starting the pipelines again, doing the major shipping infrastructure again, they're trying to hint to Canadians that we're going to do those big ambitious things. And you saw that the Canadian public did reward them with now a technical majority government. So I think investments are a double-edged sword. You want to make them because it helps the public, it helps the long-term growth. But in a time like this when the deficits are high and stuff, many governments are very shy of doing that investment.
Since we've touched upon in this series of Why City, how important are municipal elections, because I see, we'll talk about the reward part as well, though as much as you spoke about infrastructure, but I think other than the infrastructure, one of the major reasons that I think was the Trump factor as well, in both the cases, whether, we saw a vacuum when Prime Minister Trudeau, he would mince his words, but towards the end part of his career, he would say that yes, he was threatened by President Trump or so many things. I think Canadians, they were looking for someone who would stand up for their country. So I think that vacuum was filled by Mark Carney, and I think with due respect, I'm saying this, Conservatives, they missed the bus there.
Yep.
So I asked Pierre Poilievre many times, and in all my tours I would ask him, what's your opinion about your foreign policy? That was my topic, US, China, India in particular. I didn't get an answer which I was looking for. I think Canadians didn't get that answer. So same with Ford as well. I think as much as I've mentioned this earlier as well, he was here and he was, when I was talking to him off the air in 2018 or 19, I guess, and I was telling him US is on the decline right now, not a superpower. So I thought he even got offended. He said, no, US is a big part. And here we are, Premier Ford, positioning himself as someone who would stand up for the province, for the country, whether right or wrong. Go ahead, you want to add something?
No, I think you're absolutely right. But I am not discounting the fact that both Ford and Mark Carney were able to position the threat of the US tariffs and Donald Trump in the right way. But that's the why. A lot of time voters are like, I have that vacuum to fill. Both Ford and Carney were able to fill that. But you have to see that both of them talked about the how. So most logical voters, the most engaged voters are like, okay, we have this massive threat, but have you always seen that question people ask, what are you going to do about it? One of the reasons, as you rightly said, that people were not willing to give the Conservatives a chance is because maybe they were not willing to accept the plan they have. Because one, they were not talking about it, as you say, missing the bus. Two, the plan was not convincing, right? It was late to the party and it was not convincing. The reason Mark Carney is always able to say, or Ford is able to say that Trump is the threat, but Ford said, we will invest in Ontario. We will protect it by investing whatever required, which is basically a hint at saying we'll have to do a record amount of deficits to be able to support the infrastructure we need. Same thing as the Mark Carney. So I think the why they won is, of course, the Trump factor, the US factor, but the how and the what they will do matters a lot. But in terms of municipal politics, as you're saying, I think it matters a lot. I keep saying that to everybody I meet, that your day-to-day life as a resident, especially in the GTA or any part of the country, is actively decided or impacted by your local government. The parks you go to, the recreation facilities you use on a day-to-day basis to enjoy your life, the transit you take at a local level, your garbage pickup, your school decisions, all of those things happen at a very local level. And a lot of problems we see at the street level happen because of that. But unfortunately, the reality is an average 40% turnout in municipal election tells you that not enough people care. So I think that is a topic that you're rightly pointing out in this segment, and we should talk more about it, not less.
Yeah, I agree, and You've made some very good points. This is same question for you as well, Ramonaji. We do not realize that how important our cities are, how important municipal politics is, and but still the voter turnout is not that very encouraging. It's not very engaging. So your take, how important city politics is, how important are municipal elections? Please go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the biggest impacts on our day-to-day lives. For example, we could spend hours talking about, Prime Minister Mark Carney taking a trip to foreign countries to do trade agreements, but, that doesn't impact what we just heard about your garbage pickup, your roads, your infrastructure. Do your kids' schools, their after-school programs in terms of like when it comes to community centers, when it comes to your taxes, your property taxes, all of that, right? And when it comes to policing and everything else that is really you're impacted on a day-to-day, much more when it comes to municipal, jurisdiction of policies, and therefore that's why it's really important to have municipal elections and know who the candidates are that you're voting for, because essentially, the way we see it in municipal politics is that, a candidate gets elected and then they could be in office for 20 years very easily because of name recognition. They put up their signs, and I'm not saying that's because they didn't do anything positive, but I'm just saying it's easier to stay long term in municipal politics versus, on a provincial or federal level where you have to run for a party system, and then you have what at the best 2 terms, maybe 3 terms before there's a change of government, depending on what seat you're in terms of your riding, if it's safe for the party that you're running in. But when it comes to municipal elections, it's really not a party system, and it's in Ontario, it's based on that person's ideas, and so it's really important to get to know your candidates. What are their qualifications? What have they done in the past? What enables them to do this massive job? What is their comprehension level? Have they had, have they worked in the private sector? Have they had to, earn a living that is outside of a government job? Have they had to make payroll? Do they understand the implications? Do they live here? What is their vision for the city? And are they going to be able to, follow through on it? And you also have to realize that they need to also be a type of personality that's able to get along with other councillors, regional councillors and mayor, to be able to move motions across. So you don't necessarily want someone who doesn't get along with everybody else, and therefore their greatest ideas could just, not get voted in because they just don't have that, reach with their colleagues. So there's a lot of things at play here, which really determines the growth of a city, right? Like when you see some of these massive cities that have a massive population and you compare them to other cities, and we've heard that about Brampton for so long in terms of what it has and what it lacks compared to other cities that have lesser population. And so there's that aspect of it as well. So it's very critical. And absolutely, we need to have a higher voter turnout, but there's also constraints, right? Like when you look at what a candidate can spend on their campaign, it's nowhere near what a political party can do, right? When you go through a provincial or a federal election, you have really the leader and the engine of that political party behind them, in terms of the media attention they get, in terms of the policies that they'll spend, the money they'll spend on advertising. So really, you get a messaging that's out there that gets to more of the voter base. Whereas in municipal politics, it's really that one individual that's running with their ideas and based on their infrastructure. And of course, within the campaign spending limits, it's how do you manage a campaign? Now, we know that as of May 1st, it's going to be open for people to register to run in municipal elections, but now they have 6 months, right? Which is massively different. If you're running for provincial federal elections, you have 30 odd days, right? Which is the writ. Right now, they get 6 months and they get this cap on spending. And in the 6 months, they have to run their campaign, in terms of buying signs, locations, doing their literature, massive costs. And then how do they get their message out to voters and make sure that the right candidates get in that have the vision and have the qualifications, but also can be ones that build bridges with their colleagues, with other council members, and of course, and be able to work with their other counterparts like the MPPs and the MPs. And of course, a big part of that is, who's the mayor? What is, because we do have, big mayor powers as well. So, what is the mayor's vision, and can they get along with other levels of government to be able to get the funding? But it's so critical because, and here's the other thing, because we know media is shrinking overall in terms of their coverage because they just don't have the funding to do so and the resources. And that's why, why media is in a very good position to be able to have these conversations and reach out and make sure that, it's been doing debates for candidates that is not available on any other network when it comes to mainstream media as well. So it's about, the coverage. So when people get elected and they go into become, councillors, regional councillors and mayor, whatever ends up happening also in the city, it's not also not highly covered. So a lot of times the voter base, the constituents don't even know what's going on at their city politics and, whether their hard-earned, tax dollars are being spent well. And so it's a massive thing of A, it's one of the most important levels of government. B, how do you make sure that the right people get in, given that resources are limited and the duration of campaign is longer than provincial and federal? And how do good candidates get their messages across to get into council? And the third part is, how do you make sure that you have the coverage from a media perspective to make sure that people are aware of, what their council is doing, how's their money being invested, what's the long-term plan, what's the short-term plan. So that's all very critical. And of course, when we talk about infrastructure, aside from having it, at these massive games, it's true, we need highways. Like, look at the GTA in terms of its growth. We have one highway east to west, of course, not including the 407, that's a paid highway. And then you have, one major one, the 404 that's linking central Toronto, on the Yonge line, which is important because business corridors on the Yonge line and the subways on the Yonge line. And then you have, something a little bit less with the 400 and then other highways. But it's very critical in terms of we're growing region, and we don't have that level of infrastructure that can be used day to day to get, people and goods and services to the marketplace. So those are all critical things, right? Like, every minute you sit in gridlock traffic on any of these highways, you're essentially, it's time away from productivity. So yeah, absolutely, you need that infrastructure spend. But coming back to importance of municipal government, it's one of the most, and I think we need to tackle, let's get good people to in office, and also make sure that there is a lot of transparency and coverage of what is happening on council and what is the management of tax dollars.
Yeah, great points. Great points. Thank you for that. And you're right. I mean, things are quite spread out as far as GTA is concerned. As much as I would definitely support a strong transit network in the interest of environment. But then, if things are so spread out, are we really able to build a very strong transit? Yes, of course we need that. But then there is also, I think we need more highways as well to keep moving things around for our economy, for all those reasons. And as you rightly mentioned, you look at the east-west corridor. We just have two highways at the east-west. Of course, we have some north-south, highways. But then I don't know. We need more highways through. One over the lake, maybe one in the north side. They're proposing Highway 413, but too little, too late. Even the transit, the LRTs, they get delayed. They are always over budget. And, there are a lot of challenges while we're building these LRTs as well. So your take on transit and highways?
No, I think everything, I agree with everything Ramona said there. So I think to the point is, as you said also, everything is delayed all the time. I think if you look at Mississauga, there's so much talk about their delayed, development of the LRTs and all that kind of stuff. So having that oversight on municipal politics is also very important. But Ramona ji correctly pointed out that the fact that there is less media coverage of it, There's less people engaged on a day-to-day basis on what's happening at the city hall, and a lot of those decisions are costly decisions, and they impact you. Yes, the municipal government has a limited role to play when it comes to highways and stuff. Provincial government will take the bulk of that cost, but municipal government has to be the right partner when it comes to those decisions. And if they lack or they're scared of making those big decisions, then you will often find the public doesn't get the infrastructure they want. Like if you look at the downtown cores of a lot of these cities outside Toronto, when was the last time you saw massive development of new things, right? They've almost remained the same in a lot of different parts of Ontario. Is because a lot of times these governments are not that ambitious for the same reason that they don't want to take the risk, they don't want to be ambitious because municipal politics is not that looked, so they just want to stay comfortable in their position. Incumbency factor is high. As Monaji said, if you elected once and if you do an okay job, the chances of you staying elected for a long time are high. So a lot of them are playing the safe card. But again, for our cities to grow, the way our population has grown, when many people were not able to afford houses in the core areas, they started moving out. You have new buildings, you have new developments coming out, and the right way to support them is those decisions happening at the municipal level. So a big part of, I think, the biggest challenge, if you look at the municipal politics, has been the housing affordability, right? Lot of people have come to Canada, that's a federal issue or a provincial issue, depending on who's sponsoring that nomination. But at the same time, when these people want places to live, all of those zoning decisions, all of those property development issues have to happen at a municipal level. And when active municipal governments have proposed big development ideas, a lot of local residents and neighbors have come out and said, the popular term we say NIMBYs, who say not in my backyard, or YIMBYs, you say yes in my backyard. So you hear that term a lot at the municipal level. So unfortunately, a lot of times the municipal governments have to bear the decision made at the federal or the provincial level. They have to live with it, even if they don't have the resources, which probably was one of the reasons why you have the Strong Mayors Act now, because sometimes provincial government was like, we have these new people, you have to build 50,000 new homes in your city by 2031, and the city is saying, I cannot do that. I don't have the budget to do that. The other very, very important thing, I think you talk about transit infrastructure, I would say policing infrastructure. That's a big factor. Crime is one of the biggest issues we have, and yes, you can blame every level of government for that, but at the end of the level, a lot of local police budgets come primarily from the local city budget. So at a regional level, yes, Mississauga, Brampton, Caledon can support the Peel Police and stuff like that. But at the same,
I think that's the number one item on any city or the regional
their
budget.
line item budget.
That's the number one thing. I don't think so. They spend anything more than the policing budget, and it's ever increasing as well. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Absolutely, sir. So I think they're doing that, and at the same time, for me to support more active policing, I need to increase the cost because policing budgets are always very ambitious. If I increase cost, where is the money coming from? Your property taxes. So same thing Ramona said, your property taxes impact your day-to-day a lot. My personal property taxes have almost gone up by 20% where I live. It's an important decision for me to decide who's gonna not increase my property tax. But I have to be reasonable to say the reason they're asking for so much money is because they're trying to offer me better policing and more community initiatives and stuff like that. But if I as a resident am not engaged with those decisions, then I'm only gonna complain about the fact that my property taxes keep going up. So every decision at the local level would directly impact my life. But again, unfortunately, as three of us agree, most people would not care about it.
Yeah. Another important aspect that I want to discuss over here is you just mentioned some certain times, Ramona ji will ask you as well, certain times, there's sort of a comfortable feeling, because the anti-incumbency factor is not that much. So most of the times you get elected once, so probably 2 terms, 3 terms, 4 terms you will be there. Things are a bit different this time, Toronto. One city. I'm not sure whether our incumbent mayor could take it that easy. We could have a different mayor in Oshawa, in Caledon as well. So there could be certain challenges in Mississauga as well. I'm not saying there'll be a lot of challenges, but there could be certain challenges in Mississauga as well. So little bit of a shake-up in GTA, which I think is pretty necessary. Vaughan, Brampton, Oakville, there are certain cities, Markham as well, I don't see, Richmond Hill as well, I don't see much of a shake-up there. But I've mentioned all these cities. Ramona ji, your take on all this, please.
Yeah, I think it's always great to have new people come into politics, right? I mean, sure, we need that. We need a breath of fresh air, new ideas, people who, come from, all kinds of professional backgrounds. We need that because when we have the same sort of council that's been there for so long and some of them, been there for 20 plus years, then there's a way of just settling into the job, right? I mean, have you ever had a job for 20 years? That's this, say which you have. Yes, Virgin, you've been doing this for 20 years. But there's that thing where when it comes to politics, you're planning for, your constituents, you're planning for the city. Like if it's, in York region, essentially, you're part of the York region, you're planning for entire that. And then of course your city, then your ward, and whether it's Peel. So that's really a big deal to be able to think in terms of long-term plan. Because when you plan for your own household, okay, sure, you can plan for the 5, 10, 15, 20 years ahead. But when you're planning for a city level, you want to be able to think in terms of decades and a century to see, what do I want this city to be? What's the vision for the city? And, we hear so much, people say that we want to create a city where you can live, work, and play and not have to travel into other municipalities for work or to travel to other municipalities for, entertainment. And you should be able to have all of this locally. And that's always been the vision that most politicians sell to be, that this is the ideal neighborhood that you want to move into. This is a place where you can have really good schools for your children, really safe neighborhoods. You could either open up a business locally or work at a really good company locally. And then when you want to enjoy your money and entertainment with your family, you have really great parks, really great restaurants, really great, when it comes to musical facilities and all kinds of places to be able to go to. And that's the ideal dream. And then there's the other aspect of it is, you want that city to be a place where it can host, massive events, right? For example, let's look at Brampton, right? Brampton is, mere kilometers away from Pearson Airport, right? It's there, almost on the border, and Pearson is Canada's largest airport that has, flights to everywhere around the world, right? With far-reaching flights. Now there's more flights to China because of this new trade agreement as well. And yet, so it's the influx of people that come to Toronto and, whether it's for, to visit family, if it's for tourism, if it's for business, the conventions that they would come to, and then the hotels. So then there's that question of like these cities that are, like Brampton, that's on the border there, does it have a convention facility at a great scale like we've seen in other cities to be able to host those key business, meetups and conventions? Does it have those really nice hotels to be able to host that level of people that come in and essentially, need to have accommodations? So these are all kind of visionary things that you need to have in place. I said this to you, off the air, of course, saying that what a shame it is that Hazel McCallion didn't write a book, right? At the helm of Mississauga and what she did with Mississauga in her lifespan in politics. I mean, nobody knows the ins and outs of how all of that was done to grow it to the level of city it is today. And had she written a book, at least, there would have been cues and lessons to learn from. So aside from having a vision, it's also so important to be able to, transfer that knowledge down into writing and have that to be accessible. But I think it's about, looking at some of those best case scenarios of cities that are doing really well, and to see how that can be mirrored for Canadians. And we know that, right now we're talking about Canada Strong, and we're looking at CUSMA that's around the corner for July 1st review, and what it would mean for Canadian jobs, given that 70-75% of our exports go to one customer, which is the United States. And as much as the Prime Minister travels to these trade agreements, we still need really good export countries that we can export to Canadian goods. And of course, we're talking about pipelines and exporting Canadian oil. But the bottom line of why I'm talking about it on that scale is that it affects, the local communities. It affects if people can buy a house, right? It affects in terms of people right now opening up their wallets and saying, yeah, I'm going to invest in a new business, or my existing business, I'm going to, invest more money to grow it, perhaps hire some people, or I'm going to, go from this house to another house. Those decisions, or I'm going to buy a new car, or I'm going to, take my family out to dinner once or twice a week, or we're going to, plan to go on vacation once a year. Those massive pocketbook deals, decisions are based on our, our country, in terms of the trade agreement conversation that's about to come up, in terms of, do we have the stability? Do we have, I've talked about how Canada, can be a superpower. We have unlimited natural resources. We have we have the waterways, Pacific, the Atlantic, we have the Arctic. We have an educated workforce. We have infrastructure, in terms of, I've driven from, British Columbia all the way to Ontario, and I've driven to Nova Scotia. And so I've seen, yeah, okay, it's one lane highways most of the time, but there's infrastructure, there's stability. We have laws. We have the Constitution, where you can come here and there's predictability. If you follow the laws, you're going to be safe, and you can grow and you can prosper. So we have everything that's needed, but we got to look at the micro level, because it affects the macro, right? Macro is all the things I was talking about. The micro level is, what are we doing in our cities and our communities? What are we doing? What's the plan in terms of the municipalities, right? Because really what happens on a global scale, in terms of what our country is, where it's situated, that means how much we're going to invest in our local communities. But that's also the bigger thing. What is the vision of these mayors? What are the visions of these, regional councillors or councillors? What do they actually want to achieve for Canada and their local communities? And yeah, we don't want people to be at a job where, eventually becomes like second nature, right? Like this conversation, I don't know how many times I blinked, because it's second nature. You don't think about how many times you blink, or, whether you inhale or exhale. So we also don't want people to be in certain jobs where they've been there for so long, where they're not thinking about fresh ideas or to do things fresh. There's a level of hunger that comes in when there's competition, right? Competition creates great open markets, right? That's why we want to have free and fair markets, because when you have more entrants, you have more competition, and people will provide better services, better goods. I want that for our politicians. The level of competition should go up, so the politician, or the striving politician, wants to do more and better for their communities and be responsible. And that's the other thing. I think we need to have something where politicians are held criminally responsible when there's criminal matters, or and also responsible. Also, I think we need to have laws, because when there's mismanagement taking place, when there's money that goes missing, when all that happens, essentially the politicians don't fall into the same category as if you were to do it in a private business. And we know these municipalities are corporations, they're registered corporations. So I think we also need to have a lot of accountability in place to see what's really going on, and how much waste and mismanagement has gone into, where these tax dollars go. It's only in government where you think that money grows on trees, right? Because you have the tax revenues that come in. So yes, for them, money does grow on trees, not in the private sector. In the private sector, you eat what you earn, right? You eat what you kill, is the saying. So it's not, I don't want to use the word kill, but it's, you eat what you earn. Whereas that's not the same thing in the private and in the public sector, where, money grows on trees. And okay, well, if I just, if I burn that money, well, there's more money coming in. And that's what we want to get away from, right? And I think we want to be able to also reduce corruption in politics, right? The lobbying efforts in politics. What are some of these? What are some of the legislations that are passed? What are some of the bylaws that are passed? Who does it really benefit? Who's behind it? You really want to be able to have that credibility in place, because when corruption goes into place, really nothing is happening. So I think if there's more competition, maybe we have term limits, right? Maybe in municipal politics, we like we see in the U.S. counterparts when it comes to the president. Thank goodness there's term limits for presidents, right? Because 4 years, 8 years can make a massive difference to a country. Perhaps we should look at term limits where people don't make a career-long, career-long politicians where not much gets done under their time. They have, 2 terms, and in that time, they really want to make an impact. They want to, have their name go in history in terms of what their contribution is. Maybe that's another way of making sure there's more competition. I mean, we got to do something other than what this stalemate feels like.
Great points. Term limits. Actually, I know this was discussed many years ago in Mississauga here as well, because at that time Hazel McCallion, she was doing pretty well. So this was discussed here in Mississauga. This was discussed, I remember, in other cities as well. Not in Brampton, because most of the time we have lots of changes in Brampton, and I doubt this will be discussed in Toronto too, because Toronto too we have seen a lot of changes as far as the mayor of Toronto goes. But you're right, term limits and more competition, term limits, these are some great points. We don't have much time left, but I want you at this time, municipal masterclass.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you
Please.
so much. I think we all talked about the problems in municipal politics. We all talked about the need for shakeups. We talked about the need for more competition. We talked about why it's better to have fresh ideas. So one of the ways, our company, EOK Consults, along with our media partner, Ymedia Group, we are encouraging better ideas, better insights on how you can run winning municipal campaigns. So Municipal Masterclass is an event presented by EOK Consults and proudly supported by Ymedia Group that is happening next month. It's only 2 weeks left, May 14th, 2026 in Mississauga at the Icon event space. It's a one-day event where we will talk about the strategies, the winning ideas on how you can power your next winning municipal campaign. We are encouraging first-timers to come. We're encouraging existing candidates, incumbents to come. We're also encouraging the challengers to come and learn from the best in the business. So we will have some leading municipal elected officials, so mayors of various cities, including Brampton, Richmond Hill, the ex-mayor of Mississauga and the leader of Ontario Liberal Party, Bonnie Crombie, just confirmed to be participating in our event as well. You'll have Mayor of Guelph, Mayor Cam Guthrie, who has decided not to run again. So Guelph is also opening as a race, and he's going to be there as well. And then we'll also have a lot of regional councillors from Mississauga, Deepika Damarla, and others coming. You'll have some campaign strategists. So people who ran John Tory's campaign, people who ran some of the biggest municipal campaigns in Canada's history are coming to that event as experts on the stage. Yours own, truly, Ymedia will also be on the panel, with the fireside chat with some of these elected officials. I'll be talking about digital marketing, some of the most important topics about how to run campaigns, how to win on social media, how to manage your campaign finances and budgeting, all those things you need to know on how to really win. It's a one-day event. The tickets start at just $150. They're right now available. We have less than, I think, 50, 60 tickets left as per the current quota. So please visit our website, www.municipalmasterclass.ca. That's www.municipalmasterclass.ca. Get your ticket, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Yeah, I think it's a great event. I've attended your events in the past, and I've enjoyed the panel discussion that we have over there. So it's great to be back once again. And I look forward to joining you, and I'll also request anyone who's interested in municipal politics. Yes, you can buy the tickets. It's $150 per person, and the tickets are going fast. So definitely looking forward. But once again, thank you so much to you, Harneet, for organizing this, because I think it's very important to discuss more about our cities, because and that's precisely the reason that we started this series, Why City. And Ramonaji, thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights. I know you had a lot to offer, and we will carry on this series with guests as well. This is our fifth episode of this series, Why City. Thank you so much, Ramonaji. Thank you so much, Harneetji. We will carry on the discussion. Thank you. Thank you. That's all the time that we have for right now. We will take a short break, but stay tuned with Ymedia.
Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media